Matt or Matthew?
Matt.
Matt's good, excellent. Thank you for joining me on Talking Energy. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we talk about Pivot Power. Who are you?
Sure. So background originally from Northern California. Played baseball for 4 years at university, which my arm disagreed with, and so wrapped that up in terms of career choices and aspirations, and then spent 3 years in the U.S. Peace Corps doing development work in Southeast Asia. Then went back to the U.S., worked on the losing end of a pretty important presidential campaign, and then came over here to do an MBA in public policy about 13 years ago, and this has become home, and have been in the energy markets for about the last 10 years. And yeah, so that's been the quick potted history. The
potted history, we have to start at the beginning. Come on, how many people do you meet who's been did you have a contract? Were you almost there as a baseball player?
Paid for university and
excellent.
And yeah, was looking at playing professionally, but realistically, I don't think the reality of being a professional baseball player was always
everyone seems to think that it's like one of those there's two games, there's basketball and baseball in America, and they always think both of them have the same sort of thing where you're picked up and you're suddenly away. Is it like that? What was the attraction of it? Was it, or you just loved the sport?
It was a love of the sport, but I also played American football and basketball growing up, but baseball is what I was kind of attracted to the most. Unfortunately, I haven't picked up cricket in my 30s.
Yes, I was going to say, now you've been here for this long.
Yeah, so my 4.5-year-old son and 2.5-year-old daughter, be interesting to see if there's any attributes or traits that I had by being able to throw a ball transitions into cricket. So
it's been a googly. They'll be there. And then the Peace Corps. I mean, it's one of those things. I'm sorry to say, I only see in movies. People go after the Peace Corps. Why go there? And what did you learn from that?
I had a pretty classic American upbringing. Did not have a passport at the age of 22. Did not even know where Thailand or Cambodia, where I was on the border of, was in the world. And really was just looking for kind of a different experience, to step out of my comfort zone, be in a unique environment, and I learned more about myself during those 3 years than I ever have.
What did you learn from being in the Peace Corps that you've brought into business?
It's a good question. Being uncomfortable, being a minority in a village where you don't speak the same language, you look different, and I think there are a lot of attributes of that, especially when you're a early stage disruptive business, which we've kind of been labeled, is being in an environment where you are, and should feel uncomfortable, trying to do big things and big infrastructure type projects was one thing. Learning as you go, not having a template or a book on this is exactly the buttons you push and the decisions you make.
So moving on from there, and how did you end up in the UK?
So I came over to do a MBA in public policy,
right?
And so decided after the program to stay here. Primarily, if I'm totally honest, to look to pay off my student loans.
Fair play.
When the exchange rate was 2.1. But not the case anymore.
No.
I would say. And yeah, that was 13 years ago, and this has become home. I'm very proud to be British. Have 2 kids, I was saying, who have British accents, which is a bit strange when your kids don't sound like you, but I'm getting over that. But yeah, and so this has
become home.
Yeah, it is.
When you sort of came into this energy sector, what interests me, and part of the reason I want to do this is, you're not like the normal people. And don't take it the wrong way. But the normal route is, they're engineers or they've come in through doing this stuff. You've been tried to be a baseball player. You've been in the Peace Corps. You've had kind of, slightly, what I'd say, semi-altruistic, more, artsy, in fact, background. What attracted you into energy, which is often seen as a very technical field, a very much an engineering, mathematical field, not one for people from more, should I say, creative backgrounds?
Yeah. When I first took a job with New Energy Finance before the acquisition by Bloomberg, it was really an industry and a company that was going to be involved in a environmental and social impact side of the direction of travel, and that really was what excited me. Now, whether it was energy or international development was definitely where I was looking to take my career. So one of the best decisions I've made in my life, and it was a great 5 years to be able to understand the market fundamentals, admittedly at 10,000 feet, working and building teams, having input into the product that we were developing and selling into the market, managing a large team of sales and business development executives was great. But it was really understanding the market at 10,000 feet, wanting to understand it at a more granular level, but also not as you mentioned, to the degree that an engineer would.
Yeah, sure.
And being able to, so it was great to start working with Good Energy and understanding how things actually work at the coalface, no pun intended. And that was a great experience for me to be able to understand the energy supply side of this. And
why did you go to Good? Obviously, we know Juliet. She's spoken at our events many times. We've known them for many years. Why there rather than one of the traditional big six? Was there something that attracted you that was slightly different about it?
Yeah, I at the outset loved the vision, the mission. Juliet as an incredible individual who's built a great company. Good Energy is still my supplier at home.
Right.
And everything that they were doing and how they were doing.
Other energy companies are available. Yeah, but what I'm saying is you could have gone from that initial kind of I'm interested in energy straight into one of the big corporates, but you chose a smaller, particularly then, smaller kind of sort of seen as eco-green energy company.
Yeah, the entrepreneurial spirit, I resonated with me personally. I think that the mission and absolutely respect for the big six and other energy companies in the market, but having that focused mission of 100% renewable supply across the year
you believe in.
made a lot of sense to me, and so I was really pleased to be able to make that change.
So tell me about Pivot Power. I have no idea what it is. Tell me what it is in a nutshell.
Sure. So I'd start as we're coming at this from a battery storage angle. And so previously we were focused at behind the meter battery storage solutions. And we had an idea, a concept that looking at the transmission level as opposed to just the distribution level is that we could build a network of strategically located battery storage assets dotted throughout the country that first and foremost would focus on enabling a balanced grid. And so in addressing that energy trilemma that we always talk about. But we thought if we took more power than we actually needed, we could take that excess capacity and run that into the market and address that desire to electrify transport. And so that could be EV charging hubs for the general public, that could be bus depots, that could be corporate fleets, that could be taxis, and so on. But through that model, in kind of exploring how this would all come together, it made a lot of sense for us conceptually. We started engaging with consultants and analysts in the market to kind of flesh out the business model in more detail. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are today.
So what are you actually trying to do? Let's explain it to the viewer. Are you trying to create almost like mini, not power stations, but mini kind of power depots across the network so that you can get your renewable power there? What are you trying to do? Because there seems to be a duality here. There's one side which is big companies who now are trying to invest behind the meter and have their own system. Are you trying to create little public nodes? What's it about?
Yeah, so we're working off of the existing infrastructure that works in the market.
Okay, so the transmission network, DNOs, you're using that?
Well, so National Grid's transmission substations, and so those kind of circa 300 dotted throughout the country, is we looked at which one of these substations, one, that we thought had available capacity that we would be able to connect to at an appropriate price, two, those that had available land that we thought we'd be able to put this battery on the National Grid substation land, and three, those that were close to population densities, major road networks where we could run that additional power into the market and create these charging infrastructure hubs. But taking a step back and on that kind of balanced grid piece is that the direction of travel from a generation standpoint has gone from big centralized generation to more distributed. And we also had a view that when it comes to the balancing side of all of this is that moving away from big centralized balancing or storage to more distributed makes a lot of sense as well.
But with respect, isn't this something that we should be doing as a country? Shouldn't the grid be doing this or the government funding it? Why are companies like you getting involved?
Well, one of the big kind of off-gem regulatory things is National Grid not being able to kind of own and operate storage assets as they're deemed generation. And so that creates opportunities for businesses like us to be able to provide those services. But yeah, I think we've seen great support and backing from the government that they do see this as a requirement and a direction of travel, that it's absolutely fantastic for us to increase the deployment of more renewables onto the grid, but if we can't balance that, it becomes a bit of a challenge.
Are you a green company?
We are, yes. The definition behind that, I would kind of ask exactly what.
Well, the reason I ask this is because if we look at where your model, and I can see the value in it, but you're going to be close to a transmission node, let's call it that way, and then you basically feed off it, create a battery storage unit. Well, that power could be coming from a gas turbine or even what's left of coal or whatever. It can be something that's non-renewable. You put it into a battery, that's fine, and we have it and we use it in our network. From all the things you've said, the whole stuff with good energy and your whole kind of sort of, dare I say, social libertarian kind of views, does that bother you? That you can't actually say to your customers, by the way, everything that you're going to get from my batteries has come from green power, renewable energy?
So we are looking at actually the kind of cable that will be running into the market. And again, whether that's going to bus depots, general public charging infrastructure, corporate fleets, and so on, is we will be looking to source renewable supply where we can.
But if you're connected to the grid, you won't be able to tell that because it's just where the power is, isn't it?
Now, the supplier side of this and how they're managing that procurement across the year will be very important to us. And so we will look to make sure that we have as much influence in making sure that in our purchasing of electricity and selecting electricity suppliers, that they do have the green credentials that align with the mission of the business as a whole.
But not to push you on it, but the mission of the business seems to be giving you a chance to have more democratization, you could say that. It's not a mission that's about green power because it's about connecting to our grid, and our grid is a mix of things, as we all know. Yeah. So you can't sort of say, hang on, we've got green credentials if we're just saying, by the way, what we're trying to do is give you more access locally to energy.
Yeah, I think on a system-wide level, for us to deploy, the full pipeline of over 2 gigawatts of storage, I take a step back and say, well, does that allow for the market to develop and install more renewables into the market? And I take a view that yes, that is the case. We are not generating electrons, but we are allowing more renewables to come into the grid. So I think there's a kind of indirect, accelerating, enabling, the kind of green side of this to take place. I would by no means try to say that we are.
No, and it's not a criticism. I think it's one of the things that I find very frustrating, that everyone wants to be green when you have to be realistic about where we are. And one of the things that we covered just last week was the opening of a new rapid reaction gas turbine station by Centrica. And you can say, well, that's a gas, but actually it gives you power now, this whole balancing point. And what I'm interested in get is your view about how you think many people would say the ambition is great, we've gone about it the wrong way because we've taken so much capacity off already by closing all the coal plants, pretty much nearly all gone. And we are now importing gas and we're importing things. So how do you see, being here for 13 years, whether the aspiration may have been good, but has actually gone too fast, too soon, and has left us in this gap where actually what you're looking at is paying more as consumers for power that you had assets that were generating.
I think if we took a step back from the outset, and I was kind of play a game of Sim City, and if we took a blank sheet of paper and we started to look at the generations, how are we going to create an electricity infrastructure, is really we would have started with storage.
Of course.
And then we would have put on some generation. And being able to create that kind of base load infrastructure that was being driven by renewables. We obviously haven't, and so we're working with the existing kind of infrastructure that we have and looking at phasing some of that out at the appropriate times and how we can build it. It's not easy. I have a lot of respect for government level from a policy standpoint, from National Grid, from a DNO perspective, for all the electricity suppliers and generators in the country. There's an aligned view that the direction of travel needs to be a cleaner, greener energy network, but it also
we have to work for what we've got,
But it also needs to align to energy security issues as well as the affordability question. So it's not easy. I'll be the first to admit. I think our focus really is creating that that balancing infrastructure that will allow more to come into it. We won't by far from do the whole thing. There will be others. I think there's the time is now. I think that we've felt being in the storage for the last couple of years that we've always felt that it was kind of the time is now. I think the time is now, but I've been saying that for a few years now. But I think
there's a shift in the public. I mean, it's always about the public. There are more. We started in 2010, one or two tiny electric cars. Now there's loads. There's hybrids are moving forward. Most people will not be driving diesels in 10 years. So there is a direction of travel, as you say. Do you think the energy sector has moved enough?
It's moving at the pace that it can. I think there's been policy uncertainty, which has not helped the situation. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what Brexit's going to look like and so on. I think it's really about the investment community, and it's not all about the investment community, but if it's investable, the market will move.
And that's the key, isn't it? If there is a financial case, things happen. However much good policy, you can all say we all want to be green, but at the end of the day, if someone says to me, by the way, if you buy this, it's 10 pence cheaper, it happens to be green, I'm going to make that financial decision to buy. Do you think the investor community is looking and saying, actually, this green thing isn't all pony, it's where we're going, and they see that there's an opportunity?
100% yes. And if you look at some of the investment decisions that are being made now, this is, from a storage standpoint, we do not have the luxury of a government-backed feed-in tariff. And those government incentives are no longer there. In my humble opinion, some of the best taxpayer money that we've spent to stimulate and really move a market forward. And the UK policy community should be very proud of what it did there. But when you look at more deemed merchant risk type investments that don't have those government-backed securities against them, these are still investable assets. If you look at the wholesale spreads that are and only increasing over time, if you look at trends of negative pricing signals in the market when turbines are howling up in Scotland, there is an opportunity for storage to be very much investable based on that kind of wholesale arbitrage and trading opportunity. And that's a huge piece of the investment case in our assets. We're also bringing in that opportunity, that narrative on the EV power offtake into the market. And again, going to all those different segments of the electrification of transport side becomes a very interesting revenue stream. Interesting in year one, mildly, a little bit more in year two, a little bit more in year three. But once the EV market really starts taking off, that becomes a huge, huge feature to be coming into the battery storage asset investment.
What do you think? You're a smart guy. You've looked at things. You've also got a slightly different take because you grew up in America. Who do you think is going to own assets in 10 years' time? So everyone can criticize the big six, and I think sometimes it's justified, and something I think it's very unjustified, because at the end of the day, you need someone to provide us power, and we're nowhere near all of us having a wind turbine on the backs of our heads and we're away. So assets will still need to be there that will allow you to carry on doing your business. Who's going to own them in 10 years, do you think?
Well, it won't be at the entire portfolio level, but we have a vision and a commitment that we would like to see community-owned asset infrastructure as well. And so being able to create that platform, and if we think about a very regionalized... So
what do you mean? We'd have a solar panel in our neighbourhood and we all own it as sort of local consumers, or what are you talking about?
So I think the community energy angle that's been talked about for the last 5-6 years has been great as a concept. I think in terms of what we're trying to do on the battery storage front is looking at creating a platform to be able to get community level investors to come on board at the appropriate time, that will also be enabling that local charging infrastructure kind of more downstream. And being able to create that platform gives people the confidence, but also increasing the likelihood of utilization. Is that, you know, if people have invested in it, they are likely to use it. And that's what we talk about, these virtuous circles, is that becomes, you know, very beneficial and attractive to all parties. You know, the big, large asset investor sitting alongside the more kind of community level investor. And so I think that, you know, that will be a portion of it, but, you know, climate change mitigation and addressing some of these challenges, it's a participatory sport, and we need to be able to include...
We need to participate.
We need to participate. We can't be sitting on the sidelines watching this very fast-moving train that is very daunting and very intimidating. And so that's one of the biggest things that we're focused on, is how do we provide those opportunities for engagement, participation, understanding the narrative, understanding the opportunity, understanding the risks, trying to focus on some of the climate optimism side of this, is that we can do this. You know, there is the political and the social will. I think we just look at the electrification of transport. I think that's pretty much decided that is the direction of travel. And it's great that we have a target of 2040 to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles. Our view is we can do that quicker. There's been some great pictures of New York in 1910, a lot of horse and carriages. In 1920, right. You don't see many horse and carriages.
Absolutely.
So this stuff can happen pretty
Peak horse, we've heard about that, yes, and the changeover. One thing I wanted to just pick up with before we end, obviously America, land of your birth, has a lot of things that goes on, particularly with the current government, particularly with Trump and all of that. But setting all aside, one of the things that I noticed when my recent trip to your home state was the variety of energy there, from oil and gas to masses of wind farms, masses of solar, hydro. How do you think the whole kind of America is dirty argument, does that play out in your mind as true?
It's a good question. It's a tough one, spending most of my professional life here, but still obviously having family in the U.S. It's an interesting place, especially right now.
Of course.
Is my family in Northern California. There aren't a lot of similarities in terms of other parts of the country.
Sure.
And so I think that speaking on behalf of a sliver, you know, of the country, is that, you know, they see some of the political decisions and the, you know, pulling out of the Paris agreements is as crazy as we do over here. So I think that, you know...
But for the vast majority of Americans, it's about jobs, isn't it? And it's about energy security. And they see fracking as part of that. And the figures don't lie, do they?
Yeah, it is tough right now to understand how that all plays out. I had the luxury of last October being able to go over to Pittsburgh to be part of Al Gore's Climate Realities Corps. And there's a reason that he picked to have this assembly take place in Pittsburgh. It was when Trump pulled out. He said, I represent the people of Pittsburgh, not Paris. Little you know that Mayor DePuto in Pittsburgh highlighted the fact that actually Pittsburgh did not vote for you, President Trump, but also that Pittsburgh actually is the backdrop of climate change and where this all happens. And in 1979, Mayor DePuto talked about this, and I coming from the West Coast, don't know a lot about the history of what happened in Pittsburgh, but they built, as the steel heartland of America, they built every large tower throughout the country. And in 1979, the markets opened up and international steel came in. And Pittsburgh kind of died that day. And he talked about, it's only now kind of climbing back, but still, some of the most polluted water in the Allegheny, and how they're going to try to make that transition. It's becoming a huge kind of almost East Coast version of a clean tech Silicon Valley, and how they're going to be able to play a role in kind of the future energy economy. But I think that you see the impacts, and in the state of Pennsylvania, where you have a lot of fracking taking place, and kind of Pittsburgh as a city trying to communicate to their communities in their own state, saying this is what can happen. Looking at the impact of fracking in your water system locally, as this is how this can all play out. So I think it's tough to speak on behalf of the U.S. as a country.
It's just interesting to see that it's always seen as negative, I think, from over here. And I just wanted to get your feeling on whether that's slightly unfair.
But you see, we haven't had some of the economic incentives to drive more fuel-efficient vehicles.
Yes,
and we were talking earlier about your ability to be able to fill up at an incredibly cheap price.
Absolutely.
And so those incentives or disincentives to move to alternatives and electric vehicles become less attractive when the economics don't stack up as much. And the distance, the sheer vast size of the country to be able to drive from A to B to B to C and building that electric network throughout the country is doable. It's not as easy, my humble opinion, here in the UK, which I think it's by no means easy, but
it's
the
a lot
population
easier, isn't
density that we have, I think is quite conducive for us to be able to build this network of EV charging infrastructure.
And finally, seeing from when you came to this country and now obviously been part of this sort of energy journey, do you see us as sort of leaders out there in a time when we're getting panged from all sides for Brexit and all of that? The energy sector actually, I've always thought, is very forward-thinking in this country compared to many of its European colleagues, let alone America and other countries. What's your view?
Yes, I think I'm a bit biased, but if I look at this from a policy trend perspective, it's paved the way for a lot of other countries that have followed. And look at feed-in tariff in the UK and Germany and the structure that's sat behind that. It has not been perfect. It has been a roller coaster, a challenging one at times. I think it's a bit of the American optimism of the glass is half full. I think it's really galvanized an industry. I can tell you how many kind of people that we've all stayed in contact, and as we've gone through these twists and turns and lefts and rights, is that those that have stayed committed and stayed involved and look to start new businesses or transition into existing ones, is that it's established a real industry with a lot of passion and a lot of commitment, that people are going to take this to the next level. And so I, pleased that we're a small part of that, and it's been great to continue to work with so many people that I've worked with in the past over the last kind of 10 years of my life. So,
excellent. Good luck with everything.
Cool. Thank you very much.